We're pleased to welcome Bob Kotsonis, treasurer of the Flying Yankee Association, to Mass Bay RE this evening with his program, The Flying Yankee, Past, Present, and Future. Bob will review the modern history of the Boston Maine Railroad Streamliner number 6000, more commonly known as the Flying Yankee, although it had a number of other names during its career. He'll review the attempts made by multiple groups to restore and operate the train and the current status and condition of the train. Most significantly, the recent acquisition of the train by the Flying Yankee Association from the state of New Hampshire and its relocation to its new home in Conway, New Hampshire. A lifelong resident of Maine and New Hampshire, Bob is a retired healthcare executive. He has a keen interest in the history of New England railroads, which led him to work with others to restart the restoration of the Flying Yankee. Bob played a central role in discussions with the state and planning the strategy for the Flying Yankee's future. So, Bob, congratulations on all the progress you've made over the past few months, and welcome to Mass Bay RRE.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay. So we're going to talk about review the history of the train from a lot of different aspects, from not only the historical part of the train, but also its 30-year trip trying to get restored. We'll spend some time on that. But more importantly, I think what our future is, with the recent changes, with the change of ownership, with a new direction, hopefully we can generate some excitement. But I will cover the history of the train operations, not in a lot of detail, but in enough so that if you don't understand what the train is, you'll get a feel for it. Its restoration journey over the last 30 years, current condition, kind of what's been done, what needs to be done. And then we'll talk about our plans for the Flying Yankee going forward. So to start with, B&M 6000 was built in 34 by Bud and delivered to the Boston, Maine in 1935. 197 feet long, and it's an articulated train, meaning that the three cars, these two center cars, share trucks between the first car, second car, and third car. So it eliminates the weight and the complexity of two sets of trucks. 132 passenger capacity, and it ran from 35 to 57, and it was retired in 57, and then went up to Edaville in 57 as part of their museum exhibit and stayed there for quite some time. This is a drawing, I'm sure some of you have seen this before, but it's a good way to describe the train. This is what we call the A car or the power car. So up front here, you have this cab, a two-seat cab. The generator is about, I think, maybe a foot away from the back of the guy who's running the train. So it's tight quarters. The Winton 201A was a 600 horsepower powered diesel that ran the train. And then in the baggage compartment that backed that up, there was a steam generator for steam heat, a small galley here where they would make sandwiches and small meals for the people riding the train. And this A car had 28 seats in a coach section at the rear of the car. The B car was strictly a 60-seat coach car. This is the one car that actually has had a lot of restoration work. So if you get to see the Yankee, you'll see that the upholstery has been redone on the cars. It's been repainted on the inside. It looks pretty good. And then the C car, the rear of the car, was a combination of 32 coach seats and 12 lounge chairs on the rear end of the car. And actually, the interesting part about this is that if this back part of the car was actually used by a brakeman for doing backup moves, and because the train had to be wide to turn, there were a lot of backup moves. So he actually had brake control back here, and working with the engineer could actually manage the train. So it's part of the Yankees, part of the Zephyr family. There were 10 actually Zephyrs manufactured between 34 and 39. They were all powered by Winton engines, with the exception of the last one. It actually was powered by an EMD 567. And then the Yankee was the only Zephyr outside of the CB&Q system. So it was sort of unique in that way. But their stainless steel construction, that shovel nose, that whole look that they all had was similar in design, and was really an attempt to try to regain some passenger volume that had been off to to buses and for cars, and at that point, even some air travel. But they were speed was the game. They were comfortable. They had very low operating costs, so that the compared to the steam of the era. So it was interesting for the railroads to try to run these and save money at the same time. And it was really a pioneer in the use of diesel engines and for passenger cars at a time when it was like almost exclusively steam powered passenger trains. So it's really a pivotal technology between steam and modern diesels. And if you look at the evolution of the Zephyr, the last one almost looks very much like a standard E unit when you look at the front of it. But it really was the beginning of diesel powered passenger trains. These are all of the 10 that were made. Obviously, Pioneer Zephyr is the first one, Yankee was the second, and then all the way down to the General Pershing Zephyr. And you can see that it went kind of crazy after the first few. The first few were, just 3 cars, low horsepower, all Wintons. But then when you start in the twin Zephyrs, you start to see a double engine and actually V12s, and actually this is the General Pershing with the AMD 567. And then when you look at the count of cars, you can see the first 4 were all 3 cars. Then we started going up 4, 7, 12. Again, it was a capacity issue. And the articulation of these changed over time because of the complexity of having to turn them and deal with these long trains that couldn't be taken apart. So you start to see with the twin Zephyrs that the first car could be decoupled from the train. The power car could be decoupled from the train. The rest of the train was still articulated. And then when you get on to the Denver Zephyr, you can see that the coaches were in sets of 3, so you could take 3 cars apart, move those aside. And then the last one, the General Pershing, was completely no articulation at all. So you can see the evolution over time of the technology and how they were used. These are the 3 car sets, and you can see that the Flying Yankee really stands out in terms of its seat capacity. It really had the largest, 132, whereas the others were less than that. And if you really look at where it was different, it was this second car where the Yankee had a 60-car coach seat. The other ones had combinations of dining, baggage, extra space, things like that were not used for passengers. So by far, the Yankee carried the most passengers and was really, focused on that passenger role. The survivors, here they are, the Pioneer Zephyrs complete, and it's in the Chicago Museum of Industry. It's 2 stories underground, I understand. I've not seen it yet. The Mark Twain Zephyr out in Wisconsin, at the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad. That's in the process of being converted to a dinner train. I know they are repowering it. I was actually out there last year, and they've been very, very helpful with our efforts. The General Pershing Zephyr, just the power car exists, and that's at the National Museum of Transportation in St. Louis. And then obviously the Flying Yankee. So operating the train, it had its original route was always radiating from Boston. Its original route was up through Portland into Bangor, and then over the years, it shifted off. I think the second one was the Mountaineer up from Boston up to Littleton through Crawford Notch. Then it made it over on the Minuteman, the Cheshire, that went up to White River Junction, the Minuteman to Troy, and then finally its last bit of operation was between Boston and Portland as the Businessman. And if you look at this chart, kind of tells you, 7.5 years running from Boston to Bangor, and really what pushed it off that route was the wartime traffic. Its 132 car passenger capacity just wasn't enough, so it was pushed off, and that's when it became the Mountaineer going from Boston through Littleton. And it was about there for a year, and then its next big stint was as the Cheshire going from Boston to White River Junction. Minuteman was about just under 5 years going to Troy, and then again the Businessman Portland to Portland and Boston back and forth was about a half a year. And when it did run from Boston to Bangor as the Flying Yankee, It had a regular route through Dover on the western route, but it also came through at least once a day on the eastern route through Portsmouth. And actually, for about a year during the middle of the war, because of the heavy traffic on the western route, it came through Portsmouth exclusively for about a year down that eastern route into Boston. So the restoration story, it started in '93, so it's a long story, but we'll make sure it moves on quickly here so we don't take any more time than we need to. But from '93 to 2008 is really when the restoration story expanded to. There were actually we are the fourth attempt to try to restore the train. The first one was I'll talk about it, but it was called the Mountain Division from '93 to '95. This is really Bob Morrell's baby. The Claremont and Concord work from '97 to 2005, and then up to the Plymouth and Lincoln or the Hobo Railroad from 2005 to 2008. And then the Flying Yankee Association, which starts up in 2021. So the Mountain Division is probably not well known by a lot of people, but it was really the first incarnation of how are we going to restore this train and what are we going to do with it. The state of New Hampshire at this time is looking for bidders to run the Maine Central Mountain Division through Crawford Notch. Bob Morrell, who owns Storyline and quite a well-known New Hampshire entrepreneur, purchases the Flying Yankee from the Edaville. And he develops this really complex plan of what he's going to do with the Flying Yankee, how it's going to be incorporated into a much bigger plan that he has to run the train through the notch. So he forms the Flying Yankee Restoration Group Limited, which is a different organization, the Flying Yankee Restoration Group Incorporated. It takes ownership of the train from Morrell, who owned it personally. And they actually go out as a company and they seek bids to restore the Yankee as early as in 1991. And I'll show you some detail on those bids. And he also forms the Mountain Division Railway Corporation in '92, and that's the entity that's going to make the pitch to the state of New Hampshire to run the Mountain Division. So the plan, it was really wild. It first of all involved the purchase of the Attitash ski area as part of it, and construction of two terminals at the far ends of the line. The line was running from Attitash to Fabian's, and at both those locations, there was significant plans for hotels, a large terminal, retail space. I mean, it was like two big retail developments at either end of the line. It also included light rail or RDCs to run from Bartlett into North Conway to make that important connection with the tourist trade in North Conway. And then starting in '94, his plan was to purchase F units, put one train together, run it through the notch, purchase some Jeeps, and run a special train that was shorter and into Sawyer River, which they were going to make a sort of an attraction all about New Hampshire logging. So a big exhibit there for people to go and see. So this was the initial plan. And then the Yankee was going to be restored and it would join the roster in 1997. That was the plan. So the Yankees' role in this bigger Mountain Division plan was they were going to restore just the power car. And in 2024 dollars, that money was about $1.5 to $2 million. That was the plan to spend on it. It went out to I think it went out to 5 different locomotive rebuilders, and 3 responded. A Republic locomotive of South Carolina, there's their figure of just under $900,000. They could do it in 6 months, and they were going to put a Cat engine in, a 3506, which is a 465 horsepower repower job, and it was going to have to meet Amtrak specs. That was part of the requirement of the restoration. Another company down in Illinois, same, a little bit cheaper, Cat repower, again Amtrak specs, and then Precision National at 800, almost 850,000, same thing, repower in about 6 months of work. The 2 other cars, the B car, the coach, and the parlor car would be restored in New Hampshire somewhere, and it was likely going to be the Hobo where they would be sent. So it was moved to Glen in 93, awaiting restoration. And this little weird story shows up in the middle of all this is there's a group in the 1996, 94 Atlanta Olympics. This group down there actually wanted to restore the train and use it as part of the Olympics to shuffle around VIPs. And they were going to pay for it. And it had a plan to not only go down and be used in Atlanta for the Olympics, but also be used in other parts of the country. But it was supposed to return to the White Mountains each summer to run on the Mountain Division. So that was like, okay, you never know. So this idea of the Olympics was actually incorporated in the Mountain Division plan that was presented to the state, but it kind of quickly fizzled as the effort to get the bid from New Hampshire did. So it really never took place. This is Bob Morrill sitting in the cab of the A unit, and this is material to the right is a big poster that they put up, and you can see that we've got two famous trains, the Flying Yankee, and the second train he called the Spirit of the Notch. And it was these posters were, I guess, were plastered all over the place in anticipation of this being successful and is starting to operate. This is the picture of a drawing of the Attitash development. It was extensive. You have retail restaurants all through here. You have a big lodge and a depot. You have a big Y that was constructed, a small yard outside of there. So a significant increase in development for the Attitash site. And then this is a picture of the base lodge that would be one of these at Fabian's and one of these at Attitash. So it's a very impressive building. The budget for this thing was enormous. And this is the kind of the neat thing. They couldn't do a Y at Fabian's, so they were going to construct a 200-foot turntable. You know, why not? And that's how they were going to turn it. So
and an oval turntable at that.
Yeah. Yeah, we had some discussion at the board. Should we pursue something like this? And we decided we probably wouldn't. So attempt number 2 is the Claremont and Concord. How do we get here? Well, Conway Scenic wins the state bid, and this whole Mountain Division idea just kind of like goes away. It just evaporates. And I think Morrill realizes it's not going to go anywhere, and he's got this train. What do I do with it? So he sells the Flying Yankee Restoration Group Limited, which owns the train, sells it to the Morrill Corporation for $278,000. Now, this is basically paying back Bob Morrill for his $200,000 purchase that he paid for the train when it was at Edaville, and a cost of relocating the train from Edaville to Glen. And then in November, the Flying Yankee Restoration Group Limited dissolves corporately, so it's gone. And then he turns around in June of 96 and he sells the train to the state of New Hampshire for $1. The Flying Yankee Restoration Group Incorporated, which is the corporate name of the Flying Yankee Association, this is us, is formed in 1996. And the purpose is to restore the train, oversee the restoration, and raise funds as a non-for-profit. So the Flying Yankee Restoration Group Incorporated starts looking around to who's going to restore the train. They talked to Guilford. They made some trips up to Montreal to a Canadian Allied Diesel, and they also talked to the Claremont and Concord. So Guilford says, no, they really don't want to get involved. And then pressure from the state to keep any kind of work on the train within the state kind of knocks out the Montreal option, and it ends up going to the Claremont and Concord. Claremont and Concord poses a cost of just over $1 million, and they're going to complete it in about 3 years in October 1999. Wish it had happened. So the Yankees moved in 97 to Claremont. I'm sure a lot of you have seen pictures of that. Work begins, but the work begins, and if they find out that the Yankee is in much, much worse shape than anybody thought. When you look at systems, every one of them, electrical, HVAC, everything had to be rehabbed or completely replaced. Very, very poor condition. And the train had a carbon steel frame under the stainless steel body that everybody sees. That was in terrible, terrible shape. It all had to be replaced, and it was extensive amount of work. In fact, I'd say probably 60% of what Claremont and Concord did to the train involved, repairing the body of the train itself. But it was extensive work that was totally unplanned for. And as you can imagine, it pushed out the timeline and just added cost to the project. So the project it's on it for a couple of years. The work is slow, but it keeps on growing in terms of cost estimates, and it continues to get delayed. And it puts a strain on this three-way relationship between the state of New Hampshire, the Flying Yankee Restoration Group, and the Claremont and Concord. And you can see in the minutes and things of meetings how that it got more difficult for everyone. So in the year 2000, they're actually in formal mediation because things had gotten that bad. Mediation did seem to work for a while. It kind of got things back on track and got things moving again. Unfortunately, it didn't last forever. And in 2003, all work at Claremont and Concord stopped. And it was a combination of certainly funding. The funding was getting pretty thin. There was some dissatisfaction with Claremont and Concord, not necessarily the work, but some of the other issues. And I will say it's not anyone's fault. When you look through it, the state contributed to the sort of the failure of this. Claremont and Concord did, as well as the Flying Yankee Restoration Group. So everyone bears some responsibility. So the search for a new vendor starts, and a plan to move the train starts to unfold. So attempt 3 is Hobo. It goes to Lincoln in August of 2005 with a lot of fanfare and a lot of excitement that, we're getting this thing back on track again. And I think they called it phase 2, which was a nice little way to say we didn't do it the first time, so we're going to try again. All the parts that were outside the train at this point were loaded into 40-foot containers. There were actually 5 of them, and they were moved up to Lincoln as well. Planning restarts. Restoration, we're going to move on. Hobo is front and center. They present the state with a very comprehensive restoration plan in February 2006. I've seen the plan. It was very thorough, very well thought out. Had a $2.5 million price tag on it with a 3-year completion time frame. So here's where things started to go south here. The state sat on it for about 6 months and didn't say anything. I know that Hobo had made some investments thinking they were going to get this work, including personnel and equipment and stuff. But the state comes back after 6 months of silence and says, nah, well, you have to come up with a whole $2.5 million before we'll award any contracts. And that you could almost feel the air going out of the room. It just stifled it. The state does give the green light to go ahead and restore the trucks at this time. So that's some good that did come out of this. In December 2006, New Hampshire Central wins the bid to restore the trucks. They go up there, and Hobo, and not surprisingly, not the Flying Yankee Restoration Group, is in charge of the project. The state actually, at this point, has removed the oversight of restoration from the Flying Yankee Restoration Group and has assumed that role. So the trucks get completed in a couple of years. The state does fund some roof repair late in 2010, but you can see that the Hobo's interest in the project is fading very quickly. The funding dries up. There's not a lot of interest from anybody to do anything, and we kind of go into this 11-year where it's just kind of sitting there. And by 2016, Ben Clark at Hobo is making noise that he really wants the train off his property. And so things were not looking good. So then I wish I could say we were the knights in shining armor. I guess that's yet to be determined. We've got a lot of enthusiasm, and let's see. So in April 2021, a new board comes together. We do change the name of the organization to the Flying Yankee Association. The board is there's 9 people on the board. It's a real mix. We've got some people that are heavily involved in historic preservation of rail. We've got some engineers. We've got some finance people. We've got some it's a real mix, and some marketing people. And it just right now it just really works. So that we I think are a pretty effective group. So in 2021, we come together for the next year. the new board, here's how we spend our time. We gathered records and documents from a whole bunch of locations. The records of what happened and where things were was all over the place, physically all over the place. We had to go out to several locations and get stuff and bring it back. We created an electronic archive to house all this stuff, and we're still building that. We conducted interviews, one-on-one interviews with past board members, state officials who were involved with the project and had since retired, and Claremont and Concord employees as well, to get really everybody's perspective on kind of where things went. The goal was we really wanted to understand how did we get here, because we didn't want to make the same mistakes. And it became very clear to us anyway that throughout this, the obstacle to success was really the state ownership issue. There were a lot of other things, yeah, that were issues, but this is the one that you weren't going to get around, and it had to be solved. And the reason behind it is because the approach that the state was using to restore the train was they were doing it like they were repairing a bridge. They would put things out to bid, get a bunch of vendors coming in. They'd have vendor profit in there. They wouldn't use volunteers, and it was a we'll do the whole thing kind of approach instead of a stepwise as you have the money thing. Certainly not approach that any museum who was restoring a train would take, and much more expensive. And the state ownership just killed any opportunity for public or private grants, and it made getting private donations difficult. Who would want to contribute money to basically to the state of New Hampshire, when a lot of people felt the state of New Hampshire really should be funding this thing. So it created a funding problem for us. And then the other thing is it's a very small group. The train was managed by the Division of Rails within the DOT, which is a very small group. They're very busy. They're understaffed, and they have a lot of priorities. And most of the time, the Yankee wasn't one of them. And I can't fault them for that. But dealing with the bureaucracy of a state, you've got communication issues. You kind of don't expect fast decisions, and just the interest just wasn't there. So that's it. It became clear to us that if you weren't going to get the ownership away from the state, you weren't going to be successful. So we've done our research, we've got our ducks in a row, we know what we want to say, and we approach the state and get ready to pitch this idea of you really need to give us the train. So in January, we start talking to them directly about ownership issues, about our plans, who are we, what are we going to do? And these discussions they go all the way through 2022. We were meeting with the state about every 5 weeks, sometimes every month. There were a lot of meetings. So in the meantime, from board members, we raised $470,000 to kind of show the state that we were serious about moving forward. We weren't just, let's hope we can get some money together. That gave us a real, that's money that we can use to really start things moving. So the state finally agreed with us in 2022 and said, yeah, that's probably a good outcome. Their quote was, "We were not good stewards of the train." And they supported the idea of transferring ownership. The only problem was they are starting to say, well, gee, this is a state asset. There are rules for what we have to do if we're going to dispose of a state asset. So we just, how do we make this happen? And it was not clear. Believe me, it was not clear. They certainly the most standard way the state would get rid of something, they put it on the website for auction, and off it would go. It would be an open auction, and somebody from Nevada could say, "Hey, I need stainless steel. Send it out here." So it was that would be the kind of Wild West option, and it would be difficult to control that or get a good outcome. They also talked about some kind of special thing where they would work the Attorney General's office and the governor, saying this is a special circumstance and we don't have to follow the rules. And they got cold feet about that, about moving in that direction, I think, probably being concerned about criticism. And then in the middle of all this historic bridge process that the state, actually Department of Transportation had shows up. And it's a very well documented, well scripted way to dispose of historic bridges. And they said, we'd like to use this process. It's already established. We know how it works. We know what the criteria is, and we want to use this to remove the train along to a different owner. So the state, taking this idea of this historic bridge process that they've established several years ago, they put out an RFP, request for proposal, for restoration and preservation of the Flying Yankee. And it's published in November of 2023. And it invites anyone who would like to submit a proposal to do so in December, which obviously the Flying Yankee Association did that. This is our plan. It's was about 30 pages long. The main part, we had 4 or 5 other supporting pieces, but it was a ton of work on our part to kind of get everything into one document. But we were successful on doing it. So in the summer of 2023, an important thing happens. The state actually funds a study that takes the train and says, is the Flying Yankee eligible for National Historic Registry? And you have to go through this process to have it determined that, first of all, it has to be eligible before you can even apply. So they went through this eligibility process, which was extensive, and hired a consultant out of Baltimore to do it. And it does meet the criteria, and it is now labeled a registry eligible asset, which automatically puts on some protections in terms of what you can do with it. The Flying Yankee Association does intend to complete this process and get it on the National Historic Registry. But this RFP, the decision was not how much money somebody had to throw into it, but what was the best preservation plan and what was the best restoration plan. So that was their focus. And after 2.5 years worth of work, we were awarded the ownership of the Flying Yankee on July 24th. This just actually a couple months ago. So it was a night for toasting, as you can imagine. So we do have some restrictions on what we can do with the train. Because it's going to be on the National Historic Registry, there are these things called Secretary of Interior standards for treatment of historic properties. It's a very big name for, it's a bunch of rules on what you can and what you can't do with a historic property. So it does limit what you can do with it. In other words, you can't turn it into a restaurant or something that's totally, in left field. It doesn't prevent you from doing like some modernization of the train. But you've got to make a story for that and a case for that. The state also has oversight responsibility for the next 15 years. So we have to report to them annually on what we've done, what we plan to do in the coming year. They can show up anytime to inspect what we're doing. So we are going to have oversight, and we're okay with that. So what's been done to the train? You got, that's the big challenge. A lot of people don't know this, but there's an extensive amount that has been done to it already. So the car, the nose of the car was completely shot. You'll see pictures of it later on. It was completely rebuilt. The car was actually out of line from the crash at the derailment in 45. It was fixed to a point, but not completely by the Boston and Maine. So that repair was actually completed by Claremont and Concord. All the doors and the supporting structure, and there's a lot of them, were all rebuilt. And instead of using carbon steel, they use stainless steel as supports, no longer, so they wouldn't have to go through that deterioration again. The seats were all rebuilt. All the frames were rebuilt. They were all recushioned, all that stuff. They are in containers, all wrapped up in cellophane. So we haven't been able to take all that apart to see what condition they're in. Hopefully they're in good enough condition. We won't have to do too much to them. The main and auxiliary generators were both removed from the train and sent off and rebuilt. The traction motors were rebuilt. One of them still got some issues, but they were rebuilt. Actually, in Dover, New Hampshire, not too far away. The trucks were, as I said, were rebuilt. They had new radiators constructed, new fuel tanks fabricated, new air tanks fabricated. and a complete new custom design, actually Westinghouse brake system, was purchased for it, and it's sitting in boxes in those containers. As to the Winton, the block was repaired and refinished. The crank was reconditioned, installed back in the block. 10 new sets of pistons and sleeve were manufactured from scratch. They were actually reverse engineered. So we have 2 extras, and then 8 sleeves were installed back in the block, and 10 fuel injectors were manufactured. And all the glass in the cars was replaced with FRA glass, and all the rest of the parts that are not in the train are, again, as I said, are in the containers. So this gives you an idea of the condition that Claremont and Concord saw when they first got it. This is the Winton back in '97. You can see what terrible condition it's in. And this is after they have been working on it on the right. Obviously a dramatic difference in what it looks like. And then this is the B car, that middle car. This is prior to restoration as it came in '97. And this is after the work that Claremont and Concord did. So they did a great job with this, including that car actually included a rewiring. This is the cab. There's the sort of before 1997 at the start of restoration and afterwards. So you can see the extensive rebuilding of the nose of the train. And this is you can see the underside of the nose. This is the carbon steel. You can see what terrible condition it's in. And this is really throughout the whole train. So a lot of people just didn't realize that that's where a lot of the money and time went, was in working on the body. This is the engine bay with the Winton removed, but you can see the terrible condition it's in. This is the state it's in now. So it's all ready to receive the engine, and this is the main generator sitting up here. It's already been reinstalled. So what's our plan? Well, the stuff I'm going to talk about now in terms of what are we going to do with it is, again, this plan is based on what do we know now. That's going to change going forward, which means the plan's going to change going forward. But knowing what we know now, here's what we are trying to do. First of all, we're not going to do this alone. We're going to work with 9 other organizations to get it done. There's 2 classes of groups working. The first one is we call them project partners. These are organizations that are going to be actively involved in the restoration. Conway Scenic, I'll talk a little bit more about them later, but they're going to be very involved. Wisconsin Great Northern has already been involved. We email back and forth, talk back and forth. Again, we've been out there to see the train. They've been very helpful, and especially where they're going through this whole repowering of their train. We're going to watch carefully as they do that. Effective Grants LLC is a consulting firm out of Boston who will help us source grants and apply for grants. Hunter Research is a company that specializes when you've got a piece of property that's on the National Historic Registry. How do you document things? How do you take care of it? What reports do you have to file? What do you do? What you don't do? So they're going to be very helpful to us. And the New Hampshire Preservation Alliance is a local group. They can actually help with grant money, but they also are really good for finding vendors who specialize in historic work, electrical work, plumbing work, woodwork, steel work. So if you're looking for someone like that, they can help you find somebody like that. Then we have project resources. These are organizations that are not going to be actively involved, but we're going to use them primarily as information sources. Chicago Museum of Industry has already been very helpful, as is Boston Maine Historical Society and Illinois Railway Museum and the National Transportation in St. Louis. So all of these organizations have already been helpful to us. And I'm sure that help will continue as we need more information and questions come up. Our part of our plan was to move the train. So 6 days after we get ownership, we moved the train. So you can imagine that we were probably working on this about 6 months ago, which is true. We didn't know exactly when. We had an idea when we might get ownership, and we kind of backed into that in terms of a planning piece to arrange the the resources necessary to move the train. And believe me, there were a lot of hoops we had to go through. We wanted the train back on its trucks. This is a decision that we made some time ago. It's been off it for 31 years. It's about time they get back on it. So the move actually started on July 28th. That's day 4 of ownership. We went up to Twin Mountain. That's a DOT site way up in New Hampshire where all the containers and the trucks were stored. So our flatbeds showed up and a team showed up from the Flying Yankee Restoration Group, and we went to work. We had to take the trucks were actually in wooden boxes. The top of the boxes had protected the trucks really well. The bottom had just disintegrated, but we were able to get them out and get them on flatbeds. They're in great shape. We were really pleased. Then it was a matter of moving our 5 containers worth of parts, and to see these guys move these things was like watching a ballet. Nothing tipped at all, up very straight, because they're full of stuff, and all it takes is one swing and you got parts everywhere. So they did a fabulous job. So on the 28th, we also ran the trucks down to Conway. And if you haven't been in the Conway yard for a while, you'll see that this siding, you'd say, where did that come from? Conway Scenic did a fabulous job on clearing this siding for us, bringing in dirt, leveling it so that we can get cranes and stuff right next to the tracks. They put the thing back in service, put some new ties in. So here you have the trucks that are waiting now to receive the train, which is going to be coming on the 30th. So on the 29th, we go up to Lincoln on day 5 of ownership, and we start with cranes and lift all 3 of the cars off their piles of wood that they've been there for about 16 years, and get them on their flatbeds and get them ready to go. So here's the C car, the parlor car going on. Here's the B car being pulled up, and then the power car getting pulled up. And this was kind of difficult because that engine mount and the generator are sitting up in the nose, so you got all that weight in the front, and for these guys to lift that up, managing that was just amazing to watch. And you can see it on the flatbed to the right there, ready to go down the Kangamangas. So on the 30th, we get to move it again. As I said, it goes down the Kangamangas. We were surprised when the state said, yeah, go ahead, you can go down the Kangamangas, and it we're going to be producing some videos of that. We've got a video. We had a bunch of people doing video for us. We'll publish something shortly on that move, so you can appreciate it in much more detail. But this is the site adjacent to the yard that we pulled into, and then just one by one, lifting up each one of the cars with the cranes and setting them on their trucks. So here's the C car on its trucks. And then we have the next truck getting ready to be pushed out. So it was a little bit of a dance in that we had to put the C car on first, then put the A car on first, and then spread them apart, and to get the mounting of the center car within inches, not feet, inches of the right location, so we could just drop it down on the trucks, on those articulated trucks. So there was very little room for error. But these guys, they made it look easy. And then this I think we started about 7:30 in the morning. This is, I think, shortly around 1:30 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. There she is back together on her trucks. And it's funny, and we had to move the train around, and it took about 6 of us to kind of just shove it. It moved that easy. So it was quite an exciting 4 days for us to get this thing back on its trucks. Then shortly after that, there was a planned open house that Conway Scenic was doing. So we had our first open house on August 3rd, and you notice the sign in the front, the Mountaineer. We actually came across that. It was up for auction in Pennsylvania about 1.5 years ago. We found out about it and grabbed it, brought it up for the open house. Didn't know if it was going to fit or not. Didn't even have any bolts to put on it. One of the board members Tommy Robichard and I got on the front of the train, saw a couple of bolts that were actually in the nose, and said, that's kind of interesting. We undid the bolts and we put the sign up, lined up the holes, and I'll be darned if they didn't line up. So that was super. So we were able to kind of tack this on the front for the open house, and it went over really, really well, as you can imagine. And then this has got to be the cream shot of the B&M 4268 kind of sitting next to the Mountaineer. So there was a lot of satisfaction going on. So getting back to our plan, what's next for things? The next thing is the building. We're going to construct a 320-foot building on this site. It's going to be adjacent to these tracks. It's going to be 30 feet wide. And we're doing it with Conway Scenic, and we're in the middle. We're starting site review now with the town of Conway to get the thing approved. We had an initial meeting with the town already, and then I wish you could have seen their eyes when we said, okay, this building is 320 feet long and 30 feet wide. They're kind of like, huh? So, but the idea is to get the approvals done so that we can break ground in the spring of 2025 and get the building up. That's when construction would start. So the building is going to be jointly owned by the Conway Scenic and the Flying Yankee Association. We're going to share expenses and staff and equipment. So I mean that's good for both of us. Keeps the overhead down. It means more money that we get goes into restoration and not overhead. And after the building's up, the train will go in the building and restoration will start. But really, the restoration is going to start with an assessment. We really need a solid plan for how are we going to approach it, and what systems are we going to do, what's missing, what condition are things in, because we don't want to. I mean, one of the failures I think with Claremont and Concord was the whole unexpected nature of things. The expectations were in one place and the reality was something else. So we want to be very clear. We want to really know what we're up against, and it's going to take some assessment to do that. But after that assessment's done, then it's going to be a stepwise restoration process, probably, either a car at a time or a system at a time. Might be brakes, might be electrical, but fun for those. Get that work done, show progress, move on to the next thing. I think it's a very good strategy. So Conway Scenic, they are going to be a key resource for us. We have a working agreement with them. It's very much going to be patterned as the 470 Club's relationship with the Conway Scenic is, in that they're going to help us restore it. When we need specialized work, we will use them. We'll use our own volunteers, but we'll also use their volunteers. We will use their expertise. After the restoration's done, they will operate the train for us. And that's really, for us, it's a liability issue. They've got the infrastructure to operate trains. We don't. Rather than go through the expense of developing all that, it's much better to have Conway Scenic actually operate the trains for us. And they will also be maintaining the train for us. And so whatever revenue they make from operating the train, a lot of that will go towards maintaining the train. Again, because the maintenance of the train is going to be an expense. It's going to be an ongoing expense and has to be planned for. This is a good way to, I think, solve that issue. Now, this gets to the Winton conversation. Again, we don't know what we're going to do with the Winton. If you step back, the Winton itself is almost as important as the Flying Yankee. There are very few Winton engines still around. Certainly, there are even fewer that are available to the public, and I don't know of any of them that are operating. So it's an important historic asset in itself. Can we use it? If we can find all the parts and we can get it back together, yeah, we could use it. But the question is, if we do, you're running a motor that's almost 90 years old. It's not going to be run every weekend. It'll mean that your orientation is going to have to be 4 or 5 times a year, sort of, special runs kind of thing. It won't be a routine operation. If we want to run it much more than that, you've really got to probably be talking about repowering. The other thing that's got to be, we've also got to take a hard look at is not only is the Winton complete and can we put it together and do we have the expertise, it's the cost. If it's another $500,000 to put the Winton together, is that a good use of our funds? Then we've also got to deal with the fact that there are historic standards that we have to comply with, so that we can't just run out and replace it. We've almost got to go through the state to say, here's the reasons why we want to replace it. Here's what we intend to do with this important Winton engine, put it on display, maybe if it's operating great. So we're gonna have to do this dance, but at the moment, we don't know which music we're dancing to because we just don't have enough information yet. And again, it's about expectations. We don't want to move forward without good, solid knowledge under our belts. The train will be on display during restoration and after restoration. Again, our first open house was in August. The next one coming up is in October. You'll probably be seeing some information from us on that. There will be a small museum at the site to highlight the Flying Yankee and its history. And we will use volunteers as much as we can. We've already got 30 volunteers signed up. And again, volunteers can get a lot of work done. It can help keep your costs down. I don't know of any heritage museum that doesn't use them, and they can be a real asset. And we're working now on donations and grants. This is a pitch. We can use all the money we can get. Right now, we've got $256,000 that's sitting out there in matching funds. So every dollar you give us, we get to match it, and up to this 256,000. So that 256,000, if we get another matching, that's over $500,000. That probably will get us into the building and then some. So that's an important thing. Membership are open. Volunteers are needed. You can go to our website and you can sign up for both. You can see there's different levels of membership as you would expect, and you get different things. And volunteers, there's a whole section on doing volunteer work. We're going to start organizing volunteers probably in the next month or so. You'll start to be hearing from us and maintaining communication with you. So I think all in all, we're optimistic, but we're also realistic in that this has been tried 3 other times. And a lot of people had good intentions, a lot of money, and they failed. So this is not without risk. But we're confident that we've got the desire to do it, and we've got the skill set to get the job done. And I think I'm going to stop there.
Well, thank you very much. Anyway, that was fascinating. First of all, I'm really excited that we maxed out there may be some duplicate attendees here, but we maxed out at 117 people on this Zoom, which is really fabulous. So we have a few things popping up in the Q&A. So first of all, Bob, we had several Bobs on the program tonight. So whichever Bob this was that posed it, does the Flying Yankee Association board have any trained people, or are they all like sales, marketing, and engineers?
No, we don't. We don't have all engineers and salespeople. In fact, we do have salespeople and engineers. But we have trained people, and the dynamic is fun. When the finance guy says nah, and the train guys, makes a case for it. I mean, we banter back and forth. So we've got two of our main train guys. One is heavily involved in Danbury, and the second one is heavily involved in Seesaw Trolley Museum. So they are both train guys, and on the day of the move, you should have seen them. They were in their glory. They were up to their elbows in grease. So I think that's one of the reasons why the board works. We've got that diverse group of people, not just a bunch of accountants.
Okay. Next question. Did the Boston and Maine have a fireman in the cab when it was operating?
I believe they did. Yeah, there's two seats in there, and he controlled the brake, and I'm not sure who ran back to It must have been interesting when they tried to do backup moves and they were backing the train up and he ran back to the end of the car.
Yep.
But that was done.
Next question. How did your group, the Flying Yankee Association, start? There's very little on that.
It was if you know that the Facebook site, Flying Yankee 6000,
Mhm.
everybody was a member of that, and there was a general invite by the fellow who runs it, Brian LaPlante, um, trying to generate some interest on restarting the restoration. So there were a couple of meetings that were held. It was a broad, anybody that's on that site was invited to attend. And what came out of that was the new board.
Okay. Um, we have another question here. And I sort of previewed this before we started the meeting, Bob. Um, Person asks, I understand that the Winton engine was a real problem and using another had been decided some years ago. Historically, the Winton was a problem everywhere.
Well, it in terms of mechanics of it, there's a reason why they used it. I mean, it went for 2.7 miles, 2.7 million miles on that engine, so it must have been something good with it. They were used on 9 out of the 10 Zephyrs, and it was made it into switchers that were used for years. So yeah, it had a lot of maintenance issues, and when I've gone to the B&M Historical Society archives, you can actually pull out the maintenance records. And every time it went into Concord for its annual checkup, they were replacing rings and there was water in the cylinders, and so it definitely it had its issues. But I mean, it's a um, it it was I will tell you that if you go back even to 93, they were going to replace it, and by 97 they were not going to replace it. I think about somewhere in the 2004 or 5 they were going to replace it. They went back and forth because again it was all speculation. We're the ones that I think they're going to have to make the decision. And as I said, it's not going to be an easy one, and it's going to have multiple factors to consider before we pull the trigger. And it's really what's in the best interest of the train, what's in the best interest of the public.
Okay, thanks. We had a comment here in the chat from James Van Bachlen, who I suspect was on the property during the move.
Oh, he's on our board.
Okay, great. So he's got a couple of comments here that I'll just share with everybody. The first one, he says, it didn't move until we got the pointy end of the claw bar under the wheel tread. But once it moved the first little bit, people could keep it rolling. So there's that little tidbit. And he also says that he thinks that the conductor or trainman rode in the observation car when backing.
Hmm.
So anyway, thanks for that, James. If there's any other questions in the Q&A, I'm not seeing, I think we've, oh yeah, here, okay, a new one. Any idea why there was never any proper care of the train at Edaville? I could have cried seeing it as a tourist in 1991. Windows smashed, nothing covered, the exhaust pipes on top. How sad. Comment?
Yeah, I have no idea why they didn't. I mean, it was the condition of the Winton because of those open stacks. To get the pistons out, they resorted to hydraulic jacks. I mean, it was that bad. Sledgehammers and hydraulic jacks to get the pistons out. The thing was in just terrible, terrible condition throughout.
Okay, a few more questions have come in. Tom asks, have you considered using the Winton engine for the initial restoration and later replacing it with something more reliable?
Yeah, that we've had that conversation.
Okay.
Put it in, run it till it fails, and then put it aside, replace the engine, and then put it on display. We've had, repower the thing, restore the engine to operation, put it on a running display, outside the train. We've talked about several different alternatives, but actually that one did come up of run it for a while and then replace it later on, because we might be in a better financial position to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I will tell you that the work that Wisconsin Great Northern's doing, the what they have to do to the A car that to get that in there is scary. Because you got to remember that engine, because of the construction of the stainless steel and the way the body's formed, that engine is an integral part of of the structure. You remove that, it weakens the structure. So and you can see when the work they're doing in Wisconsin, that they're cutting a lot of stuff, and he said, well, I'm not going to run it more than 15 miles an hour, so it's okay. So you got to be careful.
Okay, next question. So the state has never given approval to replace the Winton?
Um, the state didn't give really approval for anything. They were sort of the silent partner through all of this that didn't do much. And I don't want to say bad things about the state, because it's not their fault. They were not the experts on restoring trains. So they were looking to, I think, the Flying Yankee Restoration Group to kind of fill that void. But I think I should probably stop there. The state has never been actively involved. The only thing they gave approval for that I can find is you can restore the trucks and we'll pay for it. That was it.
Okay, while we're on the subject of the Winton, Tom also comments, would be nice to hear the Winton bubbling again. I remember the sound when I wrote it. I'm jealous that he actually wrote the thing. Reg asks, is the new brake system a 26L?
I don't know. I don't know. They said it was custom, so I don't know if you could put a model on it.
Ed asks, Great Northern has a great marketing program producing 3 excellent books, volume 1 to 3, on the Mark Twain Zephyr restoration. Any possible plan to work with GN to do the same to raise money?
I think that's a great idea. We've had some thought about if you can actually buy merchandise on our website now, hats and stuff like that. So we're doing that. We've got some artwork that we'll get involved with. In terms of publications, we haven't talked specifically about that, but that's certainly within the realm of possibility. I think we'd stand on our heads to raise money. I mean, so we're looking at all kinds of different ways, but that's a great suggestion.
Okay, great. Next question. They're coming in fast and furious here. Is Mr. Morrill still alive?
No, unfortunately, he passed away in 1998. So the thing had just been moved to Claremont, and his son took over and ran the group and was the leader, provided the leadership. Unfortunately, he also passed away in 2006. So it was we lost 2 important people, and they not only their leadership but also their funding. They provided a lot of funding. So
okay. iPhone asks, are you familiar with the Winton being restored at the Mid-Continent Railway Museum?
no, I'm not.
No. Guess I'll have to check that out.
Where was it? Mid-Continent? What?
Mid-Continent Railway Museum.
Can we ask a question back? Does he know the model number? Is it 201?
He's Let's see if he put something in the comment. He certainly heard your question. Another question here. What was the hook that got you interested in doing all this?
I've been involved with railroad history. I've always been interested in doing it. I had just recently retired and looking for a project, and this kind of like fit the bill, something I was really interested in, and then, had a skill set that probably they would find useful. And I think it worked out well for both of us.
Mm-hmm. Great. Tom asked, somebody else may need to pipe in on this answer, but which Winton is at Wisconsin and where?
They don't have an engine. That poor thing came to them as a shell. There wasn't anything, there wasn't a seat in it, there wasn't traction motors in the drive truck. It was wheels, glass, stainless steel, that's it. They had nothing.
Wow.
So
okay. But this is a lot more commentary than we've had. Clarification comment, which is Zephyr is at Wisconsin. I think you pretty well answered that. I'm going to go back up into the chat just because there's a few things there. So our good friend Doug Kidd says he was part of an ill-fated attempt to restore the train at Edaville in 1972.
Really?
And then he goes on that there was no real need to give much maintenance to the train at Edaville. It really was a white, parenthesis, silver elephant there. It didn't fit into their business plan. Everybody else. And then Jim Ben Bachlan comments, the story we heard was that Patrick McGinnis more or less forced the Flying Yankee on Edaville. They weren't given much choice. But of course, it wasn't contributing as much to their visitor experience as the 2-foot gauge steam train ride. And then Doug responds, reinforcing what JV just said, I too saw some correspondence indicating that Pat McGinnis really had to twist FNB. I'm trying to think who that was. Arm 2 or 3 times to get Edaville to accept those Blount, to accept the donation. Blount hated diesels outright. Okay, I think we have exhausted the Q&A and the chat. So at this point, Bob, I just want to thank you again for a fascinating presentation, and it's wonderful to see progress being made. And after all these years, I'll just add that back when in the late 1990s and early 2000s, when the Flying Yankee was at Claremont, Mass Bay was running Amtrak excursions every February up to Brattleboro and Bellows Falls. And one of our side trips was we'd take a bus load or two up to Claremont to see the progress that was being made on the Flying Yankee. And it was looking pretty good there. And of course, the things with the Flying Yankee kind of fell apart around the time that we stopped doing Amtrak charters for a variety of reasons. So it's great to see it. And I'll just share another anecdote. Ben Clark did a program for us a year or so ago, and probably about 2 years ago. And somebody asked him about the Flying Yankee. And we'd actually I discussed this with Ben before the program, that you're probably going to get this question. And Ben smiled and said, in the Clark family, there's 3 things we don't talk about: religion, politics, and the Flying Yankee. So on that note, again, thank you very much, Bob.